Last time we saw that Paul's writing to the Philippians from prison. And we saw that whilst Paul's imprisonment might have seemed devastating to the advance of the gospel, it had actually contributed to the gospel's progress. Roman guards had come to hear about Jesus, and many Christians had been emboldened to speak more courageously of Christ too. In this section, Paul is looking ahead. He knows it's quite possible he'll be found guilty, sentenced to death by the Roman regime, but he also knows there's a chance he'll be acquitted and set free. In this paragraph, he's preparing the Philippians for both outcomes, assured that whether he lives or whether he dies, Jesus can and will be glorified. You see, it was certainly quite possible that Paul would be declared guilty and sentenced to death as a traitor to the whole Roman regime. By the time Paul was writing, many Christian leaders had already been put to death simply for their trust in Jesus. In his own pre-Christian days, Paul had overseen some of these deaths himself. Even today, Christians around the world are still killed simply for their faith in Christ. They are sustained by the conviction that their hope is bigger even than death. Well, that's spelt out by Paul in verse 21. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. To die is gain. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began, we've all had to surrender things that we love. Perhaps things on the horizon we were looking forward to. But Paul's logic here is that followers of Jesus have something that no disease, not even death, can take away. We have Jesus. We have Christ the King, who through his own death and resurrection has conquered sin and death forever. And that's how Christians truly can know death to be gain. We are assured of a future with no judgment to fear, where sin and all of its effects are gone forever and the universe is renewed. Best of all, we'll then know Jesus in a way that vastly transcends our very best experiences today. At the moment, it's as if we see Jesus through a filthy window, whereas on that day we'll see him face to face, and then we'll never doubt his sufficiency for us again, and all the hallmarks of his love will be seen in every detail of our lives. This glorious future is possible because, as we'll see more clearly in chapter 2, Jesus was willing to make himself nothing, surrendering his life to death on a cross in our place. Jesus' death and resurrection truly makes death gain for Christians. So Paul knows that dying and departing to be with Christ is, in the words of verse 23, better by far. Yet, here's the surprise. As he conducts a hypothetical conversation with himself about whether he'd rather live or die, Paul nevertheless says that if he could choose, he'd rather live than die. Now, it's not that retaining a niggling fear about death that's getting Paul. It's that through dying, although that would suit him best, he knows that he's able to better serve others in life. Look, back in verse 21, Paul writes, "To live is Christ." I think it's a strange phrase, isn't it? It's as if Paul's mind, Christ and life are so strongly linked that they're somehow entwined. True, life is only found when Christ dominates a person's horizon, crowding out all other rivals for ultimate attention. And in this light, Paul sees that there are more important things than getting what would suit him personally. If Christ equals life and life equals Christ, then Paul wants as many as possible to fix their eyes on Jesus as fully as they can. Well, that's what it means to live fruitfully, as Paul says in verse 22. And it's this sentiment which also lies behind verses 25 and 26, where Paul writes, "Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your boasting in Christ Jesus will abound on account of me." Physically separated from his Philippian friends, Paul longs to revisit them. He even seems to have some sort of confidence that God will indeed allow him to see them again, though dying would be personally preferable. He'd rather live. Why? Because then he can plow the good news of Jesus into the Philippians and into others like them, such as they too see and know that to live is Christ and to die is gain. Then their joy will grow and they will progress in their faith. Their boasting, their confidence, their glory, the subject of their conversation, will be tied up in Jesus all the more. You know, I think we see Paul's commitment worked out even in this letter. Though Paul could have wallowed in his own thoughts in prison, instead he does what he can to help others grow in Jesus. Whilst he's imprisoned, Paul can't physically visit the Philippians, but he's committed to encouraging them as he can nonetheless. And so he writes them a letter saturated with Jesus. Well, what about us? Well, as we come to glimpse Jesus together, seeing afresh that to live is Christ and to die is gain, encouraging others as we can, well, I think we too can expect to help one another grow in progress and joy in Jesus. And then perhaps those around us will come to glimpse the life that's found only in Jesus for themselves too.